The following news flash is brought to you by the Lone Star Lowdown, providing your daily bulletins for the commodities market. Today in history, news updates, and the inside scoop into the tides of the alternative. Markets for the 13th of January 2016 are currently trading with gold at $1,094.74 an ounce, silver $14.14 an ounce, Texas crude $30.44 a barrel, and Bitcoin is currently at 429 U.S. currency. Today in history, Tuesday, January 13th, 1942, Henry Ford patents a method of constructing plastic bodies for automobiles. Although the formula used to create the plasticized panels has been lost, it is conjectured that the first iteration of the body was made partially of soybeans and hemp and other agricultural organic biodegradable materials. The car was designed to run on hemp oil as a conservation effort on steel and oil due to the rationing that resulted from the war effort of World War II. In recent news, Renee Wetzel, whose husband Michael was one of the 14 people killed in the Inland Regional Center terrorist attack in San Bernardino, California last year, is seeking damages totaling $58 million in claims that were filed late December. At least 4 claims within the county have been filed: $3 million for loss of wages, $25 million in general damages, and $10 million in general damages for each of her 3 minor children. The claim, which lists the county and 25 unidentified individuals as respondents, alleges that 37-year-old Wetzel's death was preventable and caused by negligent and careless actions of the respondents. Her husband Michael worked as a supervising environmental health specialist for the county. Scientists from the Los Angeles-based Cedars-Sinai Board of Governors Regenerative Medicine Institute conducted an experiment with gene editing technique CRISPR/Cas9, showing for the first time the possibility to treat retinitis pigmentosa, a type of inherited blindness, in laboratory test mice. Clustered regularly interspaced short palindromic repeat /Cas9 or CRISPR/Cas9 is a gene editing technique that has the ability to alter genetic mutations that are known to be linked to illness. The case study involved test mice that were genetically engineered to mimic inherited retinitis pigmentosa. They were then injected with this CRISPR Cas system. A single shot enabled the mice to see better compared to the mice in the control group. The Lone Star Lowdown is currently looking for advertising. So you have a product or a service you'd like to advertise with us, feel free to give us a call at 210-363-2257. This has been your Lowdown for January 13th, 2016.
You gonna do? Yeah. Bad boys, what you gonna do? What you gonna do when they come for you? Bad boys, what you gonna do?
Okay, bad boys are here. Howdy, howdy. Randy Kelton, Rule of Law Radio, on this Friday, the 15th day of January 2016. And I want to start out by telling you that once upon a time there was a young prince who believed in all things but 3. He did not believe in princesses. He did not believe in islands. He did not believe in God. His father, the king, told him such things did not exist. As there were no princesses or islands in his father's domains, and no sign of God, the prince believed his father. But then one day the prince ran away from his palace and came to the next land. And there, to his astonishment, from every coast he saw islands, and on these islands strange and troubling creatures whom he dared not name. As he was searching for a boat, a man in full evening dress approached him along the shore. "Are those real islands?" asked the young prince. "Of course they're real islands," said the man in evening dress. "And those strange and troubling creatures, they are all genuine and authentic princesses." "Then God must also exist," cried the prince. "I am God," replied the man in evening dress with a bow. The young prince returned home as quickly as he could. "So you are back," said his father, the king. "I have seen islands, I have seen princesses, and I have seen God," said the prince reproachfully. The king was unmoved. "Neither the real islands, nor real princesses, nor a real God exist. I saw them. Tell me, how was God dressed?" "God was in full evening dress, where the sleeves of his coat rolled back." The prince remembered that they had been. The king smiled. "That is a uniform of a magician. You have been deceived." At this, the prince returned to the next land and went to the same shore, where once again he came upon the man in full evening dress. "My father, the king, has told me who you are," said the prince indignantly. "You deceived me last time, but not again. Now I know that those are not real islands. And those are not real princesses, but you are a magician. The man on the shore smiled. It is you who are deceived, my boy. In your father's kingdoms, there are many islands and many princesses, but you are under your father's spell, so you cannot see them. The prince pensively returned home. When he saw his father, he looked him in the eyes. Father, is it true that you are not a real king, but only a magician? The king smiled and rolled back his sleeves. Yes, my son, I am only a magician. Then the man on the other shore was God. The man on the other shore was another magician, said the king. I must know the truth beyond magic, cried the prince. There is no truth beyond magic, said the king. The prince was full of sadness. He said, I will kill myself. If there is no truth beyond magic, then what is the point of going on living? I will kill myself, and I am saying to you honestly, the king by magic caused death to appear. Death stood in the door and beckoned to the prince. The prince shuddered. He remembered the beautiful but unreal islands and the unreal but beautiful princesses. Then he said, very well, I can bear it. You see, my son, said the king, now you too begin to become a magician. This is a parable that you'll find in the beginning of a book called Structures of Magic by Grinder and Bandelier. It's one of the first texts on neurolinguistic programming ever produced. It was a model of the linguistic structures used by a set of essentially gurus, Milton Erickson, Fritz Perls, and Virginia Satir. These were three very famous psychologists of the time who were so effective, what they did appeared to be magic. And let me read some more of this. I'm going to read this because this contains some linguistic structures we'll be talking about later. Now, this parable is very, very significant. It is very easy to change one magic for another. It's very easy to change one ideology for another. It's very easy to become a Christian from a Hindu or a Hindu from a Christian. It's easy to change from the world and move to a monastery, and from a monastery back to the world and get married. It's very easy, but you are moving and changing nothing but magical words. Unless you realize who you are, unless you come to the point. Who is this one who is deceived? Who is this consciousness upon which this whole play of illusion goes on working, enchanting, hypnotizing? Who is the basic consciousness? Yes, a dream can be untrue, but the dreamer cannot be untrue. Even for the dream to exist, a real dreamer is needed. This is the conclusion of the whole Eastern search for truth. Let it be clear to you. In the day you live in a world, you think it is real. Your thinking goes no matter. Your thinking does not matter much because in the night, when you are asleep, you forget this real world completely. Not only do you forget about it, you don't even remember that you ever knew about it. This whole reality simply disappears. In the dream world, you start thinking dreams are real. The dream, when it happens, is as real as this world. But how to decide? Just the feeling that if real cannot make it real. Because in a dream, it feels that the dream is real. So just your feeling cannot be enough to guarantee for reality. Because you feel it looks real does not make any sense. Because in a dream, you feel absolutely that it is real. You have never doubted in your dream. Of course, you doubt when you're out of your dream, but that's not the point. If someday this dream that you call waking life is broken, and it is broken one day, that is the meaning of becoming a Buddha. When this waking dream is broken and suddenly one realizes that all was just magic, illusion, a dream that you were living through, then it becomes unreal just as every morning you wake up and the whole night in the dream world disappears and suddenly you realize there is nothing. This is a set of linguistic structures that are designed to push and pull your conscious awareness and take advantage of how human beings react and respond to linguistic structures. Last week, I presented what I call the rubber ball theory. It was presented as a tool that will allow you to begin to recognize how you are affected by the language you hear and how you use that language to construct your own reality. I don't like the term reality. It's too overused and really doesn't tell us much, because reality is in the meta model of human language. The meta model is what the original structures of magic was written about. It's a structure of language. I lost my place. In the meta model, we talk about structures of language and how they affect us. In this presentation, there were deletions, distortions, and generalizations. And reality, when we say reality, that's a distortion. Reality is not a thing. We call this a nominalization. We take a process, we take an action. We become afraid of something, and you nominalize that. You turn it into a thing. You call it, you don't say, I feel fear. You say, I am afraid. You assign a quality to yourself. Now, when you say, I am afraid, afraid means something to you. You have taken a subset of behaviors and experiences and give them this label. And when someone hears that label, well, they've done the same thing. They've taken a subset of experiences and they've given them a label. Now we get into complex equivalence. I have this label called afraid, and you have this label called afraid. Are they the same? When I say afraid, do I draw up the same feelings and same types of experiences that you do? Most likely not. When we talk to other people, they're constantly using various forms of speech and linguistic structures that dramatically affect how we react and respond to them. The point of the last show was to give you a tool to begin to realize and recognize that you are, in fact, reacting and responding to linguistic structures. In this show, what I wanted to do was talk about some of these linguistic structures. I'm not going to go into great detail, but I did want to just go through an overview of some of the linguistic structures that we run into every day. I've been doing this for a long time. I've been using these structures. I've been using the rubber ball theory. If you go back and listen to the archive a couple of times, it's better if I deliver it in person. If I have a crowd, then I can work with people and use the reactions of the people that I'm talking to help install this realization and understanding. When I only have voice to work with, I can't gauge how my listeners are reacting and responding to what I'm saying. So I have to sort of struggle with how I use my language. It's not quite as effective. So it may be valuable to listen to that a couple of times at least. Once the rubber ball theory becomes embedded in your psyche, for want of a better term, we will go to break. Or better yet, we'll talk about it more when we come back from break. This is Randy Kelton, Randy Kelton, Rule of Law Radio. We'll be right back. My tane got tumbled.
You are listening to the Logos Radio Network. LogosRadioNetwork.com.
Okay, we are back. Randy Kelton, Rule of Law Radio. And we're talking about linguistic structures. When I did the rubber ball theory, that whole procedure was developed from a map of the living mind, what I call a behavioral analog. being an engineer, I'm not very good at vague generalities. Engineers like to connect dots. The problem with the study of psychology and how the mind worked is mostly we had a lot of people that had these ideas, and they treated these ideas as if they were truths. But the problem is they started from a very high level of abstraction. We are living human beings, and when we start examining how living human beings work, we begin with a set of presuppositions. We have this idea that we know a whole lot about it because we already live inside it. And the problem with that is each of us, over a period of a lifetime, have experiences with the real world. We develop realizations and understandings and build an internal mental model of the world. That mental model helps us cope with sophisticated experience. The more experience we have, the more we interact, the more sophisticated we can become. Well, that's a really nice and interesting thing to be able to do. Problem: we learn things, and then based on the things we learn new things and add these new learnings on top of the old learnings. We learn to walk, then we learn to run, then we learn to ride bicycles, we learn to ride unicycles. We do more and more sophisticated things using old learnings that we've already developed. And as we develop new, more sophisticated learnings, the older understandings tend to fall out of the conscious perspective. There is a lot more going on in the living mind than is accounted for in the conscious aspect. Most of what goes on at a level that's outside the direct awareness, primarily that portion of the mind that handles all of the stuff that we've learned. Our mental internal librarian is what I call it, from lack of a better term. And when we have experience out here in the real world through the conscious aspect gathers in data, and then it does transderivational search. It goes inside and looks for contextual references to data sets. If we are experiencing data that indicates we're traveling at a high rate of speed, and we feel a steering wheel in our hand and a gas pedal under our foot and a seat vibrating under us, that all tells us we're driving a car. And our inner mind goes and gets all that stuff we've learned about driving a car. So when the car varies off the center line slightly, we have a whole set of reactions and responses to keep the car where we want it to be. We don't even have to think about it. That inner part handles all that stuff. We already learned how to do it. We put it away, it handles it. It's great when it all works right. Sometimes we learn things that were true and accurate when we learned them, but over time, they lose their relevance. The problem with that is they tend to get buried deep in our experience structure. And we don't always realize that we're responding from a antiquated criteria. What happens is we wind up doing things that keep leading to bad outcomes. We say things and then we wonder, why did I say that? I don't believe I did that. And then the next time you run in the same situation, you do the same thing. Most of you who's listened to this show for a goodly amount of time will probably remember me talking about going to a traffic court when I didn't have a ticket. I went with someone else. And this was years ago. We were standing out in the hall waiting for the court to start, and all these people are out there huffing and puffing and telling how they're going to get that cop's job and they're going to get this thrown out and blah, blah, blah. And one particular guy, an older gentleman, very well dressed, very expensive suit, somewhat aloof. He had the appearance of a business executive. When we went into the courtroom, he was the first person they called up. He got up there, was talking to the judge, was stumbling and stammering. He was holding a piece of paper he was trying to read from, but he couldn't focus enough to read from it, and his hands were visibly shaking. And I was wondering, what in the world is going on here? And it took a long time to understand what was going on there. This man went to school. He went to a government-mandated school for at least 12. We went to government-mandated for 12 years, and he may have most likely went to college for quite a while after that. But college is different. Grade school, high school, government-mandated, operated by the government, operated by government officials. We learn how to deal with government officials in this context. We are told what great and wonderful rights we have in this country that is governed by the rule of law. However, while you have all these great and wonderful rights, while you're in this school, don't even think of trying to express one of those, or the whole weight of the system will land right squarely on your head. We get out of school, and we have nothing to do with public officials for the most part. We go to college, and those are all paid teachers. They're not public officials. We pay them. They work for us. A whole different perspective. For the most part, we don't have anything to do with public officials, except on the rare occasion, say, when we get a ticket. This person walked into that courtroom and looked around for a behavioral set. He went inside and did a transderivational search to look for a behavioral set that he could use while dealing with public officials, and the only thing he had to draw from was being called before the principal. That's what I was seeing. I was seeing an 8th grader called before the principal for doing something wrong, and he is terrified, absolutely unable to function. We all have an internal mental model. We have experience on the world. We go inside and draw from this internal model. And I wanted to talk about some of the linguistic structures that draw on this model. One I spoke to at the beginning was a complex equivalent. We have all sorts of complex equivalents. Freedom. Freedom. What is freedom? I could ask 50 people what freedom is, and I would get 50 different answers. My rights. I could ask 100 people what their rights are, and I would get at least 100 different answers. We each have a complex equivalent for the nominalizations that we use in everyday language. And I'm not saying nominalizations are necessarily a bad thing. Without them, it would be extremely different to have a coherent conversation. But it is important to understand that when someone else uses a complex equivalent, where they put a label on something and use that label to replace a behavioral set, that your meaning for that label may not be the same as their meaning for that label. And once we learn to recognize the structures, we will better be able to adjust our behavior so that we are more consistent and coherent. This is Randy Kelton, Rule of Law Radio. I call it number 512-646-1984. I'll probably do 2 more segments on this, and then we'll go to the phones. We'll be right back.
Health-conscious consumers are ditching plastic food containers, worried about leaching chemicals. Are they being health-wise or just paranoid? I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, and I'll wade into the controversy over plastics and health next.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This message is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
Concern over plastic is rising, prompted by some studies that say compounds in water bottles and food packaging can cause cancer, infertility, and birth defects. But is ditching plastic a good idea? Most concerns focus on BPA, a compound used in plastic softeners. Some scientists say these compounds leach into food and drinks, but the plastic industry says otherwise, noting that experimental findings have not been repeated. Until scientists can agree on plastics, what should we do? Personally, I avoid plastic bottles and packaged meals. After all, fresh food can only do us good. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht for StartPage.com, the world's most private search engine.
You're listening to the Logos Radio Network at logosradionetwork.com.
Yeah, I got a warrant, and I'm going to serve them to the government, them, prosecute them. Okay.
Okay, we are back. Randy Kelton, Real Radio. And when we went out, I was talking about linguistic structures and transderivational search and how our mental model of the world affects the way we perceive the world. I don't want to get too deep into that at this point. So right now I'm going to go just kind of briefly go over some of the linguistic patterns that I was referring to earlier. We spoke about complex equivalent, where we use a term that we have our own definition of, and someone else may or may not have the same definition. The next one is conversational postulates. The conversational postulate is a question which on its face requires a yes or no answer, but which is really demanding a specific behavior. Could you pass me the cream? Sure, of course I could pass you the cream. Is a request for action, not an inquiry about ability. Do you really have to stand there? Is a request for someone to move. Similarly, questions can be posed. They're really instructions. We do this all the time. I suspect everyone is familiar with conversational postulates. We probably use them a lot ourselves and have had them used on us. But if you think about it, think back on when someone has asked you to do something using a conversational postulate rather than a specific request. Internally, it's more difficult to resist a conversational postulate than it is a direct command. Often, when someone is directly commanded, the initial response is to resist. If I walk up to you and push, you tend to tense and push back. But if I ask you if you're able to move, the idea of resisting doesn't immediately come into play unless there is some other element that invokes it. So conversational postulates are kind of a subtle way of influencing someone to do what you want them to do without asking them directly. Embedded commands. I may not spend too much time on that here because we'll have to talk about some more sophisticated structures before we can get very deep into embedded commands. But embedded commands are extremely powerful. The conscious aspect pays attention to the details. When someone is speaking, the conscious aspect listens to the details and tries to sort out that portion of the language that defines the conversation. The conscious aspect doesn't pay much attention to the in-between words or to the structure of words. It doesn't pay a lot of attention to conjunctions and modal operators. We'll talk about modal operators later. It doesn't pay so much attention to the structure. Now, we have another aspect of mind, what I like to call the peripheral awareness. The conscious aspect looks out at the world dead center through the center of your iris. But you can see 170 degrees. When we listen, we have a remarkable capacity to filter out other sounds. We can be in a very loud environment and talk to someone else and understand what they're saying, even if the volume of their speech is not as loud as the background noise, because we can filter out the background noise. Well, the conscious aspect does that, but the peripheral awareness doesn't. It pays attention to all of that stuff that's going on. And if we structure our language carefully, we can embed a command inside a string of verbiage that the conscious mind won't see at all, won't recognize at all, but the inner mind will hear it. I can see that you are comfortable lying there. By marking out comfortable with a different tonal shift, you can put ideas in people's minds without them consciously recognizing. Now, I'm not proposing doing that. I'm aware of embedded commands. Although, frankly, even over all this time, this 30 years I've studied the subject, embedded commands is not something I ever practiced. Frankly, they were so subtle that they made me uncomfortable. I find it just goes against my grain to try to directly influence someone quite this subtly. I don't mind jerking somebody's chain on occasion, but embedded commands are incredibly powerful, and they can be helpful, but they can also be extremely sinister. And I mentioned them because we need to understand and recognize what other people are doing. But we'll go more into embedded commands later if I find enough interest. Lost performatives. Lost performatives, that's where a suggestion is presented to the subconscious, stating that some opinion is true, but does not say how it is to be true or who is saying it. You're never going to have a problem with your nails again. As a lost performative, you say you're never going to have a problem, but you don't explain how you're not going to have a problem or why you're not going to have a problem. You just make this as a statement of fact. Anybody who's listened to what we tend to call the patriot mythologists, these people who promote these ideas that tend to come and go, they use terms with lost performatives all the time. I just had someone a couple of days ago trying to convince me that some guy has already been elected president. This thing Tim Turner was talking about years ago, where they're going to take over the government and throw out the current government. And I was objected to it because I didn't elect this guy. And then she said, she starts saying, well, what about all of this corruption in government? And I want to say, what corruption in government specifically? And when she brings up one thing and I challenge it, she goes to another lost performative, another thing that she thinks is horrible. Well, she doesn't say how it's horrible, just that because she used this term, it's horrible. When I listen to these guys, they say, this is bad, and this is bad, and this is bad, and this is bad. They don't explain how any of them are bad. I went to Gene Keating's page, first page. I read through the first page, and I was 6 unsupported presuppositions deep before I got to the end of the first page. All of these things I would have to accept in order for his strategy to be viable. Well, I didn't accept the first one. And he stated these as if they were just presupposed fact, and everybody should just accept this without question. Whenever you have someone stating unsupported facts, you should be very cautious. And that's that goes to a lost performative. Mind reading, I think we all know mind reading, where we state what someone else is thinking. I had someone else helping write a statement of facts. And in there he stated the officer became very angry. Well, how do you know the officer was angry? And what is angry? Angry is a nominalization. The officer acted in a way that I normally interpret as this distortion, this set of behaviors I label as angry. And we can go into the whole lost performative. How did he get there? How do you know he's angry? How did you make the determination? You're deciding what is in his mind without actually stating how you got there. When we come back from break, we'll go to modal operators, negative suggested normalizations, and we'll finish up on the other side. Randy Kelton, Rule of Law Radio. We'll be right back. Okay, we are back. Randy Kelton, Rule of Law Radio. And on the break, I was talking to the producer, and he mentioned a distortion that police officers often use. A distortion in the form of a nominalization. He says, Your Honor, the defendant was agitated. Objection. Statement contains a lost performative, an unsupported presupposition, and assumes facts not in evidence. Let him chew on that one. The reason I want to go through these is not so that you understand all of them. It's enough to know they're there. You will begin to recognize linguistic structures. You may not be able to say, well, that's a lost performative. But once you're kind of familiar with what a lost performative is, when one is used, this little red flag will go off in your brain. You'll say, hold on here. We got to stop here and take a closer look. I'm going to go through these very quickly. There's a bunch of them. Just to kind of briefly go over it, these are presented in the form of conversational induction. And I'm not interested in them as a tool for conversational induction for this purpose, but rather as a way to recognize when someone else is trying to induce behavior in you. Okay, so we're mind reading. We spoke of the defendant was agitated. Okay, first of all, agitated is a distortion because it's a term that probably means something to that officer. And it probably means something to the judge and the prosecutor and each jury member if the jury members are out there. But I suspect if you asked each one of those people what agitated meant, you'd get a different answer from each one. Anytime you get a term that you cannot specifically define, if you're in court, object and ask for a definition. What does agitated mean? That is likely to change the perspective of the testimony greatly. Now we're going to go to modal operators. Modal operators. There are several different kinds of modal operators. These are phrases that use words that imply things that could or must happen. Typical modal operators includes words such as can, should, must, might, could, would, will. Modal operators might be the most commonly used hypnotic form. And you could be surprised at how quickly you become angry. Could is a modal operator that tends to, when we hear a modal operator, the conscious mind doesn't really even pay attention to those. We pay attention to surprised, quickly. These connecting words tend to flow right by us. So whenever someone puts in a word, may, might, can, should, must, would, will, that should send up a red flag to cause you to look more closely at their verbiage. Negative suggestions. I won't go into negative suggestions. I did talk about nominalizations. And I'll speak to it again because nominalizations, they're so pervasive in our language that we, for the most part, don't recognize them for what they are. A nominalization is a way of being artfully vague. And if we're trying to elicit information from someone, it's being artfully vague is a very useful tool. If I get enough interest in this subject, I'll do a presentation on the meta model. The meta model is a whole different way of using language, and it's used in a specific way. And in the meta model, like if you've listened to the show a long time, you've heard me use it. When I get someone on the air who is obviously in dire straits or extremely stressed, if you've listened a long time, you've probably heard me talk to someone and you could tell that they frightened me, that I'm worried that they're in emotional trouble and they're coming to me asking me what they can do, and it terrifies me. So what I do is shift to the meta model. And in the meta model, you don't include information. You pay attention to the descriptive terms they use. You pay attention to the predicates that you use. He really made me mad. Okay, mad is a nominalization, and it turned the verb. He caused me to act in a manner that I normally describe as upset, frustrated, or angry. I just called it mad. So I said, mad? How did he make you mad? I asked them to fill in the deletions. And in doing that, we try to be artfully vague. Try not to enter any information of our own. I'm kind of getting off topic here. This is my first time to present this, so I'm struggling with how to present this information so it begins to make sense. Nominalization's the biggest deal out there, I believe, in recognizing when other people are manipulating you. Relaxation, that's the nominalization. Angry, frustrated. If you listened to the rubber ball theory last night, then you may recognize that nominalizations can become a very powerful way of interrupting other people, recognizing nominalizations. Can you tell I'm struggling here? This is a topic I've avoided for all these years, talking about on the air, because it is complex, and I'm trying to just give enough information so that you can begin to put some pieces together. But in the rubber ball theory, you try to pay attention to when you internally respond to someone, and in order to interrupt responses, a very good way to do it is to be artfully vague in your interruption. And using nominalizations is a good way to be artfully vague. And I suspect that I'm not making any sense at all. I'll get back to this at a later time if there's enough interest. Non sequiturs. I think most people know what a non sequitur is. Non sequitur is where you make one statement and connect it to a second statement as if there is a causal connection between the two when there's not. Paying attention to your breathing can make you relax even more. Paying attention to your breathing doesn't necessarily have anything to do with relaxing. But we tie them together as if one does have something to do with the other. He was exceeding the posted speed limit, therefore he was creating a road hazard. Well, even in the code, there's nothing to indicate that the mere fact that you're exceeding the posted speed limit creates a hazard. Creates prima facie evidence that a crime may have been committed. But speeding is only a violation if it created a specific hazard. And what the officer will say is that he was speeding and creating a hazard. Well, as if the speeding itself created the hazard. It's a non sequitur. He didn't say how it created the hazard. It didn't necessarily create a hazard at all. I've got examples here I don't want to read because they're all hypnotic language, and that's not what we're doing here. I will get better at this. I apologize for my stumbling around, but the only way I'm going to get better at it is to go through it. Next, we go to presuppositions. And presuppositions, they're probably the most subtle forms that occur. We act as if certain things are true without showing how they're true. And now as you relax more deeply, you feel something different, more deeply. Bad example. Presuppositions. I think everybody would kind of understand what they are, but I'm struggling here. I'll have to get a better definition. I'll get this read. Next Friday, I would like to do this again, and I will get some more work on how to present these in this model. When we talk to people all the time, if you hear me on the show, question statements people make where I question the content of the statement, and generally when I do that, I'm attacking a presupposition. They've made a statement as if and implied that something was the case without stating that it was the case, and I'm going back in to get what they implied or presupposed. I have a bunch more here. I will pull out the ones that are the most apropos, and the next time I go into this, I will be more prepared. I apologize, I'm stumbling here. I've avoided this for a long time because it is complex, and it'll take me 2 or 3 times to get this down, how to present it. But I am good. The phones are open, and we'll be taking your calls. I'll go to something else when we come back. I'll work on my presentation, and we'll do this again later. This is Randy Kelton, Hula Radio. Our call-in number, 512-646-1984. Give us a call. We'll be taking your calls all night, and I won't be boring you with any more of this linguistic stuff. We'll be right back.
It's all according to the will of the Almighty. I read his book and he says he cares not for the unsightly. These warmongers come by that term rightly. I won't pay for the war with my body. Ain't gonna pay for their car with my money. I won't pay for the
Okay, we are back. Randy Kelton, Real Radio. Be better at it. I will hone my approach. Next week, I won't go to that. I'll go to something else that's a lot more interesting. I did go to linguistic patterns because they lead to what I'll talk about next week. When I go before judges and go into court and jerk them around, and I come on the air and I tell my stories. If you'll go back to last week and go back through the rubber ball theory, go back through those first 5 segments a couple of times, and then think back on these stories I tell about jerking these judges and police officers around, and you'll begin to realize that most everything I'm doing involves pattern interruption. I'm paying attention to the reactions and responses that I'm feeling that the judge or the police officer or the bailiff is trying to elicit from me, and I'm giving him something else, and it makes him nuts. By paying attention to these linguistic structures, you get to sting them on more and more subtle levels. And once you kind of get the feel of the rubber ball theory, these structures will become more important to you. But then we'll go to things like basic reading, reality stacking, analog marking, things you can do to them that is right there in front of them. They just won't see it. Stuff that'll make them nuts, and they'll have no idea how you're doing it. If we are to take back our system, we need a bunch of people who can go out there and not get trapped into old habitual negative responses that lead to bad outcomes. We need people who can get out there and outmaneuver these guys, and instead of them making you crazy, you make them crazy. Okay, we're going to go to Scott in Texas. Hello, Scott.
Hello. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, good. No, I just want to say everything you were going over tonight makes perfect sense. And
well, I'm glad it makes sense to you. I confused myself.
I know, and that's a sad reality because I'm sitting here making notes on all this stuff, and the only thing that you really didn't give any kind of like a visual explanation was like the embedded command. What is an example of an embedded command?
The embedded commands is really subtle. It's hard to demonstrate on the air. I can give you, it's inside a string of verbiage. Let me read some of them that's in here. I'm reading this paragraph, and we have certain words in the paragraph that are in bold, and you use something we call analog marking, where I can see that you are comfortable. I put a slight hesitation, a slight tonal change to the word comfortable. I see that you are comfortable lying there, relaxing in that chair, quietly confident, looking so comfortable, as if you are ready to just let things go. I change tonal inflection. I do this. That's called analog marking. Now, if it's done nice and subtle, the conscious mind pays no attention to it. But that peripheral awareness, the one that's the part that's paying attention to the overall nature of what's going on around you, it notices those things. Frankly, it's kind of scary how powerful these things can be. An example, for anybody who has seen the movie, the Lone Ranger movie, the latest one, it's kind of tongue-in-cheek. At one point, the Indians have buried the Lone Ranger and Tonto up to their necks in dirt. And the Indians all run off and leave them there. And then the army comes, they're going to save us, and they just run over them and keep going. And they're sitting here stuck. And the Lone Ranger said, this is a pretty bad situation. And Tonto says, oh, it could get much worse for all you know. You could get an itch, you know. And the ranger looks at him like, if I could move my hand, I'd hit you over the head. That's an embedded command to scratch your nose. And that we kind of recognize. Have you noticed lately that your nose itches? Or, I was watching this guy on TV and he was smelling these flowers. And while he was smelling these flowers, I thought about my nose and how whenever I get around flowers, I always get this itch to pick one of them. And I just pulled that off the cuff. But if you do that carefully, when you mark out separate pieces of that. Whenever I'm around these flowers, and the sweetness in my nose always gives me an itch to pick one of them. Nose itch, if you mark that out, they'll scratch their nose every time. They won't hear that you did that, but they'll scratch their nose every time. Now, that's kind of a gross example, and I did explain I don't use these. I haven't practiced them. I probably should, but I had a moral qualm.
It sounds like
go ahead.
It sounds like a subliminal type of...
It is, exactly. I don't use the term subliminal because subliminal has all sorts of cultural connotations, cultural complex equivalents. That's why I didn't use it. I used peripheral awareness. When I use peripheral awareness, I have to explain it. And so that when it's a term that nobody's heard before, and I've had to explain it, so when I say it, most everyone listening will have the same meaning for that term, and I won't have a problem with complex equivalence. Does that make sense?
I'm working on it. A lot of this is kind of new because, when you start talking about lost performative and how it's not true, these are ways of thinking that people are not used to thinking. In my case, I'm just speaking for me, but I'm sure there's probably a lot more me's out there.
Well, as you learn more about this, it gets a lot more scary. As we go over these, if we go over these a few times, the best place to find all of this stuff is on television and commercials. They're using this stuff on you all the time, and you have no clue. They're good at it. They got a lot of practice at it. They're manipulating us constantly, and we have no clue what's going on. If I can get you to begin to develop a sensitivity to it, you begin to notice what's going on. And when you're in court, these guys use this stuff all the time, but what they use in court is so patterned that everybody does the same thing. It gets easy to catch them. And once you learn the tools, when you interrupt someone who's using a linguistic device that he's used 1,000 times and it's worked the same way every time, and all of a sudden it doesn't work anymore, that causes a pattern interruption. And if you interrupt them carefully, they have no clue as to what you just did to them. And it causes them to be emotionally or mentally stopped. It is the most powerful thing you can do to them. That's when they start getting all excited. They get all excited because I'm doing something to them and they don't know what I'm doing. My local district judge just recently, he stormed out of the courtroom. He was absolutely furious. And everybody else is standing around there looking at me and looking at him. And they didn't say anything to me, but I could tell what they were thinking. What did he do to make that judge so furious? And what I did was didn't respond the way the judge expected me to. If we pay attention to these, I'll go over these and get better at them. I'll get some good examples of embedded commands. But before we can really get into embedded commands, we need to get to analog marking. One of the things I do is I tell about a sister. I have a sister. And I reach up with my left forefinger and I point in the air. I have a sister and I point. She's older than me. I point. She had a bunch of kids. They all grew up. I point. Lives in Chicago. I point. That's using analog marking to do a reality stack. I'm getting your mind busy chasing all this stuff. I state it. I do an analog mark like it's important. And then I do another one, like it's important. Consciously, you can only hold 7 plus or minus 2 pieces of information at one time. So I start filling your brain up with a bunch of trash. And I point at it like it's important because I don't want you to hear the stuff I'm really going to do. I have people that know I study hypnosis, and they've asked, I had one in particular that asked me to hypnotize her to help her lose weight. And the first thing I told her is, yeah, I can do that, but I don't do classical hypnosis. I only do secret hypnosis. So you have to agree to let me hypnotize you without you knowing it. And everybody I say that to, they laugh, ha, 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 funny, funny. They think I'm joking. What they don't understand is that's the first induction. I want them watching me like a hawk. They really have no clue as to what I'm actually going to do. But it gets your conscious mind busy, paying attention to the trash details, and they don't catch what I'm really doing. If you'd like, I'll explain more on the other side. So it'll make more sense what I'm doing, and you may begin to recognize what other people are doing to you. Hang on, Randy Kelton, Real Raw Radio. I call in number 512-646-1984. We'll be right back.
This is the Logos Radio Network.
Ain't gonna blind me. Don't bore me. Well, ain't gonna fool me with that same old trick again. I was blindsided, but now I can see your plan. You put the fear in my pockets, took the money from my hand. Ain't gonna fool me with that same old trick again.
Okay, we are back. Randy Kelton, Real Radio, and we're talking to Scott in Texas. Okay, Scott, very quickly, I'll give you a therapeutic metaphor. Understand about hypnosis. Hypnosis is not really something you can do to someone. I can't hypnotize you. Nobody can hypnotize you. All hypnosis is self-hypnosis. All the facilitator does is help someone to focus more clearly. That's all they can do. So this idea that you could get somebody to do something you wouldn't ordinarily do, it may be possible if you went to a whole lot of trouble to use these tools to rearrange their thinking. Then you might be able to get them to do something that they wouldn't do if you didn't rearrange their thinking. But you can do the same things consciously just by lying to them or feeding them a bunch of crapola. So for the most part, hypnosis is just helping people focus on different things. And I had a woman at the local convenience store who she was overweight, and she knew I studied hypnosis and wanted me to hypnotize her, help her lose weight. And I told her, sure, I could do that, but she had to agree to let me do secret hypnosis. And so she thought it was a big joke, ha ha, funny, funny. Sure, go ahead. So now she's watching me. And she had this habit. You'd be talking to her, and she'd pick up a Snickers bar. And while she's talking to you, she would rip the paper open at the top, and then with her left hand, catch it at the bottom, and then strip the paper down like she's stripping the paper down on a popsicle, and then wrap the paper around the bottom. She would eat the Snickers, throw away the paper. It's kind of like going to the movies and eating a bag of popcorn, watching the movie, and all of a sudden the bag is empty. It's something you do automatic. You don't even think about it. You're just watching the movie, stuffing the popcorn in your face. Well, that's where she'd eat these candy bars. So I watched her. I had to pay attention to her body movements, her body structure, and find some things I could pace. Now, Allison was anal sphincter. And what that means is, you ever see somebody walking their feet point out at a 45-degree angle? That's not physical. That's psychological. If you don't believe it, stand up and walk. Most people's feet will track straight in front of them. But then imagine you got diarrhea. Your feet point out. And Eric Byrne, he did transactional analysis. He called this keep a tight anus rectum so you don't get screwed. You see this a lot in policemen. Anyone who tends to carry anger or frustration, you'll see this characteristic. Well, if you grow up this way, you'll grow up with skinny, spindly legs and a flat butt, because when you tighten the anal sphincter muscle, it sucks in the gluteus maximus, so you don't have a rounded butt. You got a flat butt. So she had a pronounced duck walk. Her feet pointed way out. So that was pronounced in her. She didn't have a skinny legs or a flat butt. She had pretty big legs and pretty big butt. But I knew 20 years ago that's what she looked like. And she's barrel-chested. Her chest is round instead of flat across the front. Any woman who has a barrel chest always has a stomach. It makes them nuts. I have a niece. Makes her crazy because she's barrel-chested. Can't get rid of that belly. So I looked at Allison and I made up this metaphor. I come in one day and I told her about I have a sister. She's older than me. She lives in Chicago. All her kids grew up, moved out. She got bored, went back to school, became a nurse. So I was talking to my sister, the one who lives in Chicago, and she had a patient. Turned out to be a girl that I went to school with. Now, this girl was weird. Big old fat gal, big boobs, big belly, skinny legs, and a flat butt, and she walked like a duck. But what I just did was described Allison 20 years ago. And she had cancer. What happened was she had an extreme allergy to sugar. And it caused her to crave sugar. So she's always eating sugar. We'd go down to the lunchroom, we'd eat regular food, and she's always eating these candy bars, and I stripped down this imaginary candy bar. That's a paste. That's a subliminal paste. She sees me stripping that candy bar the way she does, but I got her conscious mind so busy she can't pay attention to it. And then I tell her, well, what happened is this allergy to sugar caused her pancreas to overwork trying to get rid of all that sugar, and she developed a tumor on her pancreas, and it grew in behind her stomach. And she always had this horrible body odor. And, we were just kids. We didn't know any better. We thought fat people stink. Turned out that it affected her pancreas. This tumor developed from it, grew in behind her stomach, so that when they x-rayed her, the stomach shadowed it. Nobody found it. And it threw off her body chemistry and caused this body odor. And by the time they found it, it was so large that it was inoperable, and she just killed herself. And Allison said, oh, that's horrible. And I know it ain't. I made all that up. And I did. So what was I doing?
Subliminally.
What I was doing was setting a psychological anchor so that the next time she, without thinking, picked up a Snickers candy bar and reached up and grabbed the paper at the top and ripped the paper loose, she would see me doing that when I'm telling her about cancer and tumors and bad body odor. What I wanted her to do was lean over and sniff her shoulder. Pattern interruption. What that does is puts a little interrupt in front of her. So this automatic pattern that she runs out of awareness, and it leads to bad outcomes. All of a sudden she hits a little speed bump. Oops, and she looks down, and now she can see this candy bar. Now she can say, do I really want that thing? She has the opportunity to put it down. These tools and techniques are very powerful. I am very careful about how I use them. That's why I don't use embedded commands. I don't like them. They're too invasive. And I only do it if somebody specifically asks me to. But
well, I guess the major thing.
People use it on you all the time.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I wanted to bring it up, was to see how to be aware of it, and then to have examples of how they're being used against us.
Yeah. And I will next week. I'll go into pacing, leading, reality stacking, analog marking. Some of these tools that you can consciously and directly use that will act outside someone else's awareness. But it's effective if you first have the rubber ball theory kind of installed, so that what the rubber ball theory was a therapeutic metaphor. The whole purpose of the rubber ball theory was to install an internal mental interrupt, so that when someone pushed one of your mental buttons and you feel this response just rise up and stick in your craw, and you want to read them the riot act and let them know how to cow ate the cabbage, something inside you would say, hold on here. Whoa, stop. Mental interrupt. These guys are manipulating you. You're being had. And once you're able to stop, once you're able to catch it, now you have opportunity. Everything changes. All of these tools and techniques I'm speaking to here, they become available because you just interrupted them on a level that is outside their conscious awareness. You're dealing with them on a level that they can't even think about yet, but it's effective. And you can really kick them in their psychological teeth. Hang on, Randy Kelton, Rule Law Radio. Our call-in number 512-646-1984. We'll be right back.
Fires, earthquakes, yikes. Our homes are subject to lots of threats, but the number one cause of catastrophic water damage is something you can easily prevent. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht, back with a quick tip to keep your house dry next.
Privacy is under attack. When you give up data about yourself, you'll never get it back again. And once your privacy is gone, you'll find your freedoms will start to vanish too. So protect your rights, say no to surveillance, and keep your information to yourself. Privacy, it's worth hanging on to. This message is brought to you by StartPage.com, the private search engine alternative to Google, Yahoo, and Bing. Start over with StartPage.
When was the last time you replaced the hose on your washing machine? I bet you never have, and that's not smart. Burst washing machine hoses are the number one cause of catastrophic water damage. See, every time a washing machine cycle ends, it sends a shockwave through the pipes. After years of this water hammer, the rubber gives out and the hose can burst. And when those hoses go, they really gush. It's like a garden hose in your laundry room. Not what you want to come home to after a long day at work. So a good rule of thumb is to replace them every 5 years or use stainless steel flexible piping. Otherwise, your house could be hosed. I'm Dr. Catherine Albrecht for StartPage.com, the world's most private search engine.
Actually be kidding about chemtrails.
Looking for some truth? You found it. LogosRadioNetwork.com.
Okay, we are back. Randy Kelton, Rule Radio, and we're talking to Scott in Texas. Okay, Scott, I'm going to shut up now. You had a comment or a question?
Well, let's see. Let's go over real quick an example of a complex expostulate.
Wait a minute. Say that again?
What is an example of a complex expostulate?
Oh, you're mixing up complex equivalent and conversational postulate.
Oh,
a complex equivalent is where in the meta model of language we talk about deletions, distortions, and generalizations. And a complex equivalent goes to a deletion. It's where you take a whole process or a whole group of characteristics and you group them down into a single word. Seeing myself on that bridge demonstrates that you have made a decision. Demonstrates. Anytime you see a word that you can say how or what, anytime the word doesn't tell you everything, it says demonstrates, but it doesn't tell you how it demonstrates it. That's a distortion. It demonstrates means something to the speaker, but demonstrates could mean something totally different to you. So a complex equivalent is where I have a meaning for the term and you may have a different meaning for the term. A conversational postulate is where you pose something in the form of a question that's really a request. Could you pass me the cream? Do you really have to stand there? It's harder to rebel against a conversational postulate than it is a direct statement, like get the heck out of the way. It's a little easier to resist that than it is, do you really have to stand there? I always think of conversational postulates as kind of passive-aggressive.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, that helps a lot. Okay. Now, when we're getting into actually writing our documents, and we were talking about this before.
Yes, Scott and I've been working with him trying to get him up to speed on how to write a statement of facts. And he's making up some criminal complaints. Right. Is that what you wanted to go to?
Yeah, we'll go ahead and pick it up right there. And some of what we've been going through is he's been teaching me how to take out all the he, she's, and all that stuff to make it more professional sounding or legalese sounding, I guess.
Okay, let me talk a little bit about statement of facts.
Go ahead.
Writing a statement of facts is an art form. In the statement of facts, you can't directly try to convince someone of a position, but you can do it indirectly. So the first thing we do in a statement of facts is we write down all of the facts we can think of. We put in everything, but only put in facts. And the way you can tell when you're stating a fact as opposed to opinion is you put in a sentence. And in a statement of facts, I generally put every sentence on a separate line. And I try to construct my sentence so it's a complete fact in and of itself. So that each line is a different fact. At the end of each sentence, you put comma, in my opinion. Then if you read the sentence and it makes sense, take it out. It's an opinion. Like in this one, the officer became very angry. That is not a statement of fact. What is angry? It's a complex equivalent. You knew what that meant to you. Comedy else did. And it was mind reading because you determined what was in the mind of the officer. So if you put the officer became very angry, comma, in my opinion, the sentence would make sense. If you put the officer pulled in behind me and turned on his emergency lights, period. Now, if you take that and put comma, in my opinion, it wouldn't make sense. Okay. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. That's kind of a trick for how to make sure what you're writing is a statement of facts. It is hard to write a statement of facts without putting in an opinion because you were in the middle of this. This is not some gunpowder dry dissertation. You were emotionally involved in this. So there's emotions seeping out all over you. And you have this compulsion to explain yourself. The way I use to try to help people get past that is I first ask for a timeline. Just give me a timeline. On this day at this time, this happened. Then this happened. Then this happened. Then this happened. If you give me a timeline with statements that, in my opinion, doesn't make sense for the statement, now you pretty well got a statement of facts. Now look at your statement of facts and consider what conclusion do you ultimately want your trier of fact to come to, and write that down. And then go back and look at your facts. What facts will the trier of fact be able to use to lead the trier toward the conclusion you want the trier to go to? If any fact in there doesn't lead to that conclusion, draw a line under it. Don't erase it yet. Draw a line under it or highlight it a different color or something. And once you've got that done, go back and look at these that are highlighted and ask yourself, is this a material fact? If I'm in a court case and I'm the prosecutor and I got somebody on the stand and they're accused of speeding and I ask them how much they weigh and they lie to me, big deal. How much they weigh, unless their weight has something to do with the infraction, is not a material fact, so it doesn't matter. If it is a material fact, you have to leave it in there. Then once you've taken out all of the facts that aren't material and don't lead your trier of fact to the conclusion you want him to come to, then go back and look at the material facts you would have taken out and see if there are some facts you can add that will mitigate the effect of this material fact. Now you have your statement of facts. Next thing you go to is a statement of factual accusation. Points and authorities, whatever they call it. Now you go and give them the explanation. Okay, now you add the law. And you explain how the law applies to these facts. Here's where you put your opinions in. It is the duty of the court to determine the facts in accordance with the rules of evidence, then apply the law as it comes to him to the facts in the case. Never make a proactive statement of law out of your own mouth. because the judge can believe you and he can agree with what you're saying, but if you made a statement of law out of your own mouth, he can't pay attention to it. You must make the statement of law out of the mouth of the court. You can't say he can't do that. You have to say, according to article such and such, he can't do that. Now the judge can pay attention to it. So, write to get your statement of facts down, and then write you a statement of factual accusation. Put in these facts and show where they violate some law, some rule, some procedure. Does that make sense, Scott?
Yes, sir.
Come up with a question or two. We're about to go to break. We'll pick up your questions on the other side. This is Randy Kelton, Rule of Law Radio. Our call-in number, 512-646-1984. Jimmy, Truth, I see you there. We'll get to everybody. The show picks up as it goes on, so give us a call. We'll be right back.
Well, you know, karma's lurking around the corner. You better watch every step you take. And good and good will follow you. Yeah, Brother Jerry, sing reality. Okay, karma's lurking around the corner. Sing, Jerry, come.
Okay, we are back. Randy Kelton, Rule of Law Radio. We're talking to Scott in Texas. And let me go through a little bit more on just some of the really basic stuff about building documents. And this goes to something that I dealt with Scott earlier. You build your statement of facts and you kind of include everything in there. And in this case, Scott is going to be developing some criminal complaints against the officer and the judge, and just various and sundry individuals just for yucks. So you build the whole story. And then once you have the story complete, you go in and you do the statement of facts, and then you build a statement of factual accusation and show how each of the actions fit together. Now, it is a really good idea if you're dealing with any criminal issue to read the Penal Code and the Code of Criminal Procedure. There's not near as much material there as you would expect. And when you read them, especially the Penal Code, the important part of the Penal Code for this purpose is the first 8 chapters, because they go into culpability and liability. I think chapter 15 goes to conspiracy. When you get into DUI and all these specific offense, family violence, and all those, if your case doesn't have anything to do with that, you kind of skip over those. And then you go down to chapter 39, that offenses by public officials. That's most of what you'd need to read in the Penal Code, probably up to chapter 15. Then you might want to look at chapter 22, because that goes to assault. And this is a claim we've been making, that if a public official acting under the color of his authority commits simple assault, offensive touching, or language, and he's displaying a deadly weapon, if anybody does that, that's a second-degree felony. But if the person is a public official acting under the color or pretense of an official capacity, that's first-degree felony. So that really causes an anal restriction. So 1 through 15, chapter 20, 39. You kind of got the Penal Code. And then get out the Code of Criminal Procedure and read probably the first half of it. And then go back and look at what they actually did. And it's like I was talking to Scott earlier today. What were you saying about what you found in the code, Scott?
Oh, it's quite interesting, and I encourage everybody to get their criminal law book for their state. It costs $100 here in Texas, but it is so well worth it, because once you actually start looking into it and start reading some of these things, it's like, oh my gosh, they did this and they did this, and I've actually got sticky notes all over my doors, like, they did all this. I'm like, oh man, it's quite enlightening, and everybody needs to get educated, and it's quite exciting. So
yeah, it does get to be fun. And I was at this guy's a district attorney now, but at the time he was a county attorney, and he's a personal friend of mine. And I think if anybody really wants to do things right, he does. So I'm in his office, and he warned me about something I was doing. He said, you could get charged with barratry. I said, oh, no, or illegal practice of law. Oh, no. Under 38.123. The only thing you get charged with that for is if you represent yourself as a lawyer in a personal injury or property damage case. He said, are you sure? I'm sure. Just a minute. He goes around. He gets the Code of Criminal Procedure. He looks up 38.123, and it said exactly what I told him. He said, I'd never seen that before. I said, Greg, you ought to be ashamed of yourself. Haven't you? When was the last time you read that thing? And he said, well, I don't know that I've ever read the whole thing. Greg, you ought to be ashamed. He said, Mr. Kelton, I don't know a single lawyer who's read the whole thing. Say what? If you read that code, you read it twice, these guys will not want to see you in their court. You will make them crazy because you'll know the code far better than they do. And you're getting there, Scott. So now, once you've been through that code, and you build your statement of facts and you start your statement of factual accusation, then you start reading through that code. And then you'll have your facts in your head, and you'll read the code and say, holy crap, they did this. And you go to your factual accusation and you start inserting the codes and the allegations in there. And you just walk down the code and stick them in. When you get done, you'll be surprised at the quality of documents you have. Then, once you get that together.
The one thing I'm not clear about is creating the statement of factual accusation. So that's going to be completely separate from the
yes.
Statement of facts.
There's a good reason for it being completely separate. You take the statement of facts. You really don't need that in your complaint. I'll explain that part in a minute. You take that statement of facts and you go online and find an affidavit and take the header and the footer from an affidavit and stick it on there. Take this to a notary and have it verified. And then attach that to the complaint. Remember I said it was the duty of the judge to determine the facts in accordance with the rules of evidence. Under the rules of evidence, you have to be able to get your facts into the court. If you attach the facts in an affidavit form as an attachment to your document filing, it is before the court. And the only way it can stop being before the court is if the judge specifically rules that this particular fact is not properly established under the rules of evidence. But they never do that. So now you have all the facts in the court record. And then you take your statement of facts after you've went through the codes and then stuck all the codes in your factual accusation. I actually take my statement of facts and copy it down and then write my statement of factual accusations on top of my statement of facts. I separate the facts and then put my arguments in between. So they follow one another exactly. It's critically important that you write your documents so it's chronological and so that it makes sense to the reader. Whenever I write a legal document, I write it for a grand jury member, assuming that the grand jury member knows nothing about law. So when you write this, you have to be very careful about your presuppositions. Presuppositions are the biggest problem that we have. You know all of this in detail intimately, but your reader doesn't. You start writing and you tend to focus on those aspects to which you had a strong emotional response. You go from one emotional high to the next, to the next, to the next. Well, it winds up all of these spaces in between that you don't consider terribly important, but then you have intimate knowledge of all of it. And it never occurs to you that without these pieces in between, the reader can't attach the high points together. Anytime you create a question in the mind of your reader, he is stopped. He drops out of flow. And he'll stay out of flow until you answer that question. I read the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and in the first book, halfway through, Frodo gets stabbed. They're taking him to Rivendell, and this elf shows up. He spent 51 pages giving you the whole life history of this elf. I read the other two books looking for this elf to come back. He never came back. I was furious. Ruined the whole trilogy because I had an expectation of this elf coming back and he never did. Don't ever do that to your reader. Don't put a question or an expectation in his mind that you don't fill. Get somebody else to read it and see what questions they ask you. They'll tell you what you left out.
Exactly. And I actually gave this to a lady to read. She was a manager lady of mine. And I said, go ahead and read it and check it out, because actually I just wanted to print it off and so I could go get some copies made. And when she was reading it, and it got down to a part where, the police pulled this Suburban nose-to-nose to the defendant's car. Officer got out, walked towards defendant's passenger car. Defendant turned towards approaching officer, asking for a supervisor to be called. As defendant's head was turned, Officer Schick broke out defendant's car window, smashing glass in defendant's defendant's ears and clothes. Officer Schick grabbed defendant out of his car into place and put defendant face down on the concrete. And she goes, so did he grab you through the window of the car, or how did he grab you out of the car? And it was like, that's exactly what you're talking about, the narrow focus versus the whole 180 view, or 170, or the peripheral. So that's what
exactly. You have to connect every dot. Otherwise, you'll lose your reader.
And that's where the reader got stopped, and exactly what you're talking about.
It's actually easier than it sounds. Once you've done this one time, it becomes clear how to do it, and you'll get much, much better at it. Hang on, Randy Kelton, Rule of Law Radio. Our call-in number, 512-646-1984. We'll be right back.